Hello everyone, my name is Roya, and today I'm going to tell you all about the books that I read in the latter, third of January. Technically when I filmed my wrap-up part 1, I filmed it on the 20th, which is really 2/3 of the way through the month. But since then, I read 7 books, and I actually have 8 here because I'm going to talk about one that I actually still have like 50 pages left to go in, but I'm gonna finish it today anyway. That book is Reign of Shadows by Sophie Jordan, and this book follows Luna, who is a princess of the old king and queen who died, and so she's been in hiding her entire life, and now she's like on the run from some people who are trying to kill her and all this other craziness. And basically, I am just not a fan of this book, I don't think. I think that this book's one redeeming quality, really, is that Luna is blind. And that makes it super interesting because the conflicts that she gets into and everything are just a lot more interesting. But everything else about this book I was just not that into. It's really slow, it's kind of generic, the characters really don't have that much personality. The two characters that we really follow in this are Luna and Fowler, who is a guy that she just randomly meets who ends up helping her escape and everything, and they are like basically wandering through the woods for this entire book, and it's just really like blah, and every other chapter we get Fowler's point of view, which is a lot more boring and everything. But I really do like the fact that Luna is blind, so her point of view chapters are don't have any like character descriptions in them, or because she doesn't see anything that goes on. She'll say like, "Oh, I heard the dull thump of Fowler falling to the ground," or whatever it is. So that makes it really interesting. But everything else just feels like it's a really generic fantasy story. And I'm also listening to the audiobook that I'm currently listening to is also a really generic fantasy story. So today I went to work and was reading this on my breaks and listening to the audiobook on the way there and while I was working, and so I felt like I was reading two really generic fantasy stories that were both really slow. And there's nothing bad about like being really generic, but because I mean, look at Last of the Fire Drakes. That's a generic fantasy story, but it was really fast paced and really awesome, whereas this is just really slow and kind of nothing happens in it, and it just did not keep my interest. The first book that I finished in the since filming my mid-month wrap up was The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson, and this is the third book in the Mistborn trilogy, and obviously I'm not going to talk about what it's about because it is a sequel and everything, but it was really good. It did not end up being my favorite in this series like I thought it would. From the beginning, I think I liked the first one the best, but this one was so full of twists, so full of questions that actually get answered, and of course the ending, I just had so many feels, even though I totally predicted what was gonna happen. Like, I freaking knew, but I still just it made me really sad. Then I listened to the audiobook of I Am Malala, and this tells the story of the true story of a girl named Malala who was shot in the head by the Taliban for standing up for the education of girls. And this talks all about, she actually survived, she didn't die. This follows her life, and she basically grew up with her father starting a school and everything, and so education was always a really important thing to her. And she seems to be from a much more progressive family than a lot of people in her community come from. And so she ended up going through a lot of oh, these classmates of mine can't come to school anymore because their fathers and brothers won't let them, and blah de blah. And this book made me so sad because it really made me think about how girls are so mistreated in some places. It talked about how daughters get the bad, they don't get the good food, they don't get any butter, but their brothers all get the good food pretty much in some families. And then but then at the same time, it also made me think about how one voice can really make a difference. So it was a really, really good story. It was sad, obviously. The whole thing was really depressing, but it's also really inspiring at the same time. The audiobook that I listened to this month is If I Was Your Girl by Meredith Russo, and this tells the story of a girl named Amanda who transfers to a new school. She goes to live with her dad in a different town, so that she can go to school somewhere else because she doesn't want to continue her schooling with people knowing that she is trans. And at her old school, she was known as a boy, even though from a very young age she knew that she was really a girl on the inside. I'm not the biggest contemporary reader, but this dealt with such a hard topic and everything, and she just had, like, the whole book. It is kind of just her going to school, but it's her going to school trying to make sure that nobody finds out that she's trans, because this takes place in the South where a lot of people are just not as understanding of that kind of thing. So it ended up being a super good book. It was probably one of my favorite books that it might actually be my favorite book that I read this month. I'm not sure, because it was definitely super good. Also answered a lot of questions that I didn't even know that I had about trans individuals and like how they know they're trans and all kinds of stuff, because I've only even met like a couple of openly trans people. Next, I read Dreams from My Father by Barack Obama, and this ended up being a really good book to read. I actually started reading it on Inauguration Day when Obama became not our president anymore here in the United States, and I feel like, I mean, in my lifetime, I think we've only had like 4 presidents or something. Because the first one that I actually remember was Bill Clinton, even though I was actually born before he was president. But still, I feel like Obama was definitely like the best president that we've had during my lifetime. So a lot of this has to do with the fact that like his father is from Kenya, and he kind of grew up not really knowing his father because his parents were already like divorced and everything when he was born or something like that. And so basically, and so it talks a lot about race. There's like a black mayor who got elected, and everyone made such a big deal out of like a black mayor. Like a bunch of people were like voting against this black mayor because like they didn't want a black guy to be mayor, but then like everyone who wanted him to be mayor was like running around the streets celebrating when he got elected, and everything. And I thought, like, it's so weird that people made such a big deal out of a black guy becoming a mayor, and now we've had a black guy being a president, so it's kind of just interesting. So this is definitely a really interesting book. The next book that I read was Midnight Robber by Nalo Hopkinson, and this follows a girl named Tantan who lives on a planet that is basically Jamaica as a planet with like advanced technology and whatnot, and her father gets in a duel with this guy that her mother was cheating on him with, and he actually kills the guy when he wasn't supposed to, so he and Tantan end up both getting exiled, and basically that's kind of the whole story. So I was really looking forward to this book. I was so excited about it, but it really let me down. This book kind of, like, I was so excited to read, like, a sci-fi about Jamaica, basically, and, but I feel like we really didn't get enough of the sci-fi elements past the beginning of the story, like, at all. They really fell into the background a lot. And then also, like, past the first maybe third of the book, nothing happened in it, and it was just really boring the whole time. And then finally, what made me kind of stop reading it in the last like 30 pages, actually was the fact that she gets raped by her father, and she gets pregnant, and tries to get an abortion, but there's like no doctor anywhere near her who can do that. So she ends up basically having to have a baby that she like really did not want. But the thing that bothered me the most, I think, is the fact that another character actually tried to convince her to keep it, and was like, nope, it doesn't matter that you were raped and bloody, like, you got pregnant, you have to have the baby. And that was just such a hard thing for me to read, even though that didn't convince her at all, obviously, and she still tried to get rid of it and, like, failed. Like, that just made me really, like, that's just such an annoying, like, horrible topic to read about. Like, I didn't want to read the last, like, 30 pages because I just did not care anymore. I will still read, like, the rest of her books because my library actually has them all. They just didn't have this one, and that's why I had to buy this one. And so it just really sucks that I was just not a fan of this book because I was really looking forward to reading it. Then these last 2 books that I'm going to talk about are ones that I finished in the same day. I finished them both on the last day of January, and one is Something in Between by Melissa De La Cruz. This is about a girl named Jasmine who immigrated to the US from the Philippines when she was about 13, and her brothers were like 7 or something, and she she's in high school, she's a senior in high school, she wins a national scholarship award that will basically give her a scholarship to any college that she wants, and she's like really excited about this. She goes home to tell her parents, and her parents tell her that actually you can't really accept that award because we don't have green cards. And so it turns out that she didn't know this entire time that her entire family is in the US illegally. So this was a really interesting book, and it was really informative about the topic of like undocumented immigrants and immigrants in general. And I really identified with it too because my mother was an immigrant when she was like 18, and I've heard from her a lot of the same stuff that like Jasmine hears from her parents in this, about how like how hard immigrants have to work compared to everybody else, etc., etc. Like, and so I feel a little bit more informed on this topic hearing this story from an author who also was an immigrant from the Philippines at probably about the same age, only the author, when she came here, was not undocumented at any point. But a lot of this story is based on her own experiences, which I thought was really interesting. But basically, there were a couple of issues that I had with this that I have with a lot of contemporaries, I feel like. So first of all, the main bad guy in this story, or a bad guy, I guess, is the love interest's brother. I felt like he was kind of straight out of a Disney movie. Like, he seemed, a lot of the horrible stuff he did really had no motive at all. And he was just a jerk for no reason. And so I felt like, maybe why he did some of that stuff could have been explored a little bit better, because I really felt like that none of it made sense. Also, the romance in this, I thought there were way too many breakups and almost breakups and like really tense moments where you think maybe they'll almost break up, that with each of those, they like lost the effect more and more. It made me think of when I read The Unexpected Everything by Morgan Matson, in which there is, even though I really did not like those two characters as a couple at all, because I really just did not buy that they would want to be together because they're so completely different from each other. But in that book, there was only one breakup moment, and that actually, just because there was just one, it actually made me sad. It actually had the desired effect. But with how many of those there were in this, it just lost me a little bit. And then the other thing that I had an issue with in this book is one of my pet peeves in young adult books, and that is characters who are in bands for no reason. So as a musician, I just always kind of wonder why authors choose to have characters be in bands when that has nothing to do with the plot. So basically, in this book, Jasmine's two best friends are each dating two dudes who are in a band together. And this is like a professional touring band, and yet they always are playing at these parties that this girl keeps throwing. So basically, I kept thinking to myself, like, what is a professional touring band doing playing at like a high school party like 3 times in this book? And then at one of the parties, there's another band that plays that's also just played in Australia or something, and I'm thinking like, why are these bands playing at like a high school party when in real life, like, I mean, I'm a musician, so I feel I couldn't help thinking about how in real life, a band that was touring other countries like that and like touring that often and was a full-time musician would not be playing at just a high school party. Like, it would not make any sense. Especially with the threat of like the party getting shut down for underage drinking. Like, no musician would risk that. Um, even if those musicians are not underage. And finally, the last book that I read in the month of January is The Girl from Everywhere by Heidi Heilig. And this is about a girl named Nyx who travels through time on a ship called the Temptation, of which her father is the captain. And I really, really liked this book because The entire cast of characters pretty much were all diverse. Nyx is half Chinese and like half whatever her dad is that I don't remember. And then basically like her best friend is a Persian dude from like some ancient Persian place, and then there's a Sudanese lady and a Chinese guy. And I also thought that the entire magic system, or the time travel system rather, was really unique. Because basically what they do is they have to use a map from whatever place and time they want to travel to. And then if you want to go back to the same time again, you have to get a new map, because once you use a map, you can't use it again. So I just thought that was really, really interesting. And this whole book was just so different from anything that I'd read. It wasn't tropey at all. I mean, yeah, there's a love triangle, but it really takes a backseat to everything else. So those are the books that I read in January. There were quite a lot of them, especially since this is a wrap up of like the last 10 days of January, which is kind of insane. So anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon with a new video. Bye!